On November 2nd, 1775, a terrible earthquake shook the earth in Lisbon, and during those hours, in Vienna, Austria, a tiny baby was born. Marie Antoinette Josephine de Lorraine, Archduchess of Austria, daughter of Francois de Lorraine and of Maria Theresa, a future Queen of France, came to be. At the age of 13, she was embraced by France, but 23 years later, she was beheaded on the guillotine. She is portrayed in different ways by those at court and the people of France, and historical documents suggest that she couldn't have appeased one without making an enemy of the other. Likewise, just her presence at court made her an instant enemy of people who were competing with her for the throne, and thus public opinion and courtly affairs clashed, forming two separate identities for Marie Antoinette, eventually leading to her execution. Marie Antoinette's circumstances in large parts were affected by the reign of the king before, King Louis XV. In 1775, a French journalist by the name of Matthew Condensat de Marobert published a series of books known as libelles about the license and sexual activities of the court, in particular about the Countess du Barry and her lover King Louis XV. The Countess was a long-term mistress of the recently deceased King Louis XV and was looked down upon by the public because, 1, she was a woman, and 2, she was a commoner who had no place in court. It was named Anecdotes on the Countess du Barry, and very frequently described the license between the Countess and the recently deceased king. In it, Matthew seems to be forgiving the king, or at least understand the necessity of the Countess to fulfill the king's desires. The king had lost his wife and most of his children, and so having a heightened sexuality or sexual appetite was an understandable coping mechanism, Matthew seems to say. But, as he moves on with his anecdotes, Countess du Barry is poked at, him stating that she, for a joke, had already posed several times with the title Countess du Barry. It's a current usage among kept girls to esteem themselves with the titles of their lovers. Here, he is completely defacing the Countess's position, reminding people that she was a commoner and only a means of sexual relief for the king. In other words, she should have no role in politics and no real effect in what happens in courtly and political affairs. The word posed implies that she shouldn't belong, that she was an impostor and did so for fun, as implied by the word joke. He then terms her as a kept girl, further making her seem inconsequential and not worthy of sway in political affairs, a silly child used for adult purposes. But, towards the middle, he states that the Countess du Barry triumphed in all her glory and humiliated the Duke of Choiseul, whom he later claims to be a good and fair man. In this way, the Countess takes on the sly and devilish female character, and through sarcasm he is able to defile the Countess's reputation. He continues to give her credit for things that shouldn't have happened, such as exile of the magistrates in the 1770. Whether or not his accounts were true is unknown, but a wide readership grew for the book as Louis XV was already despised by the general public. Matthew writes that the king had now given power to someone whom power did not belong to, who also happened to be a woman and a commoner no less. Thus, upon the reign of the new queen, Marie Antoinette, and her new husband, King Louis XVI, there was already a negative view of the court. Public opinion swelled after only a few years of the reign of the new king and queen. In 1783, historical essays on the life of Marie Antoinette of Austria was published secretly, as it quickly became banned by royal censors. Even before this, Marie Antoinette's reputation was being destroyed through the publications of libelles like the previous one on Countess du Barry. Although it seems strange that what hindered Marie Antoinette the most were these pornographic publications, it actually makes sense why they are of such popularity. The royal family's ability to produce heirs and perpetuate the reign or the continuation of the monarchy naturally is of sexual and bodily context, but also directly possessed political issues. Thus, there was great political interest of Queen Marie Antoinette's body. This was much aided by the fact that Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI did not consummate their marriage until they were 7 years in, which was considered outrageous since their only job before they rose to the throne was to produce heirs. In this publication, Marie Antoinette is compared to Countess du Barry, whom, if you'll recall, is considered an evil and sly snake, a figure who caused several disorders at court. The prince starts off trying to sway the public, saying, "The public calls the hero wicked and the wicked hero. It calls the virtuous a harlot and the harlot virtuous." So were the Countess du Barry and Marie Antoinette. First, because the monarchy was supposed to look after its people, in a sense it was a potential hero. People looked to the monarchy for guidance. This publication came to challenge that, which it did, as more than 20,000 copies were in circulation by 1789. It says that there are contradictions in the public's eyes about Marie Antoinette. She may appear to be a hero, but really she is wicked. She may appear innocent, but she's a harlot, meaning and even having the same harsh and negative connotation the term slut does today. Again, as people despised King Louis XV and his mistress previously, the comparison enraged people all the more. People were able to make a connection. Marie Antoinette is another Countess du Barry, and the Countess du Barry caused political risks she shouldn't have. In another libelle and play titled The Royal Orgy, Marie Antoinette's character says, "Let's have some pleasure, but no more fruits." These fruits are a symbol for children. The play insinuates that the queen neglects her royal duties, such as procuring children, because she is lust-driven and selfish. As with the previous one, the historical accuracy of these altercations is unknown, but that didn't interest readers so much as the contribution it gave to the notion that the monarchy was failing. There was no heir, and it was unresponsive to citizen needs, so people's hatred grew towards the monarchy. Opposition to the regime grew, but hatred towards the queen reached its peak in 1786 in response to the diamond necklace affair. The history of the necklace is long. In 1772, King Louis XV asked for it to be made for Madame du Barry, his mistress. It took years to complete, and before he was able to give it to du Barry, the king died of smallpox and the necklace was left alone. In 1778, King Louis XVI, the new king and Marie Antoinette's husband, offered it to Marie Antoinette, but she refused. According to Jean Catman, Marie Antoinette's serving maid, in her memoirs of the court of Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, the queen refused it because she believed that the money would be better spent equipping a man of war. But it may also have been because it was made for a mistress she did not like, and whom had tarnished her reputation as well. Catman was Marie Antoinette's serving maid, and it is important to realize that she wrote her memoirs after the execution of the royal family. She really had no reason to say nice things about the queen, and it is still unclear as to why she did when there was such opposition to the royal family. In fact, she endangered her own life by speaking well of the queen. Perhaps because she was so close to her, she was able to look over the bad things and see the good. She idealized Marie Antoinette, and so that idealization made her remember things a certain way or only remember certain things. The necklace, nevertheless, was forgotten until 1786. In a web of lies and manipulation, a woman by the name of Jeanne de la Motte convinced an aristocrat from a noble family who was intent on being the queen's lover to purchase the necklace for her. De la Motte made it seem as if the queen wanted the necklace, and after its purchase, de la Motte disappeared with the money and the necklace. In reality, Marie Antoinette had no idea about the necklace or the purchase of it, yet after the affair was made public, pamphlets were published still mocking and striking speculation and controversy about the queen's involvement. In memorandum to Her Majesty the Queen concerning the diamond necklace affairs, the two jewelers, Beaumère and Bassange, asked the Queen herself for help as there were difficulties in obtaining payment from the noble. They say the prince had assured them that they would receive the first payment from Her Majesty. This strikes a condescending tone by saying that the queen didn't fulfill her promise. Assured means to place your confidence or have confidence in someone. This letter seems to say that having confidence in Marie Antoinette is inconsequential because Marie Antoinette will not do as she says she will do. Really, however, these letters between the prince and the queen and the jewelers claiming that the queen would pay were forged by de la Motte, and even after her arrest, the public still used the affair as a means to target the queen's reputation. Again, it was Marie Antoinette that was put to blame, not de la Motte who caused the whole thing, nor the court noble who had taken the money from France's national treasury. By this time, people's faith in the ruling monarchy had considerably diminished, and the idea of absolute power was distasteful. King Louis XVI, having realized this, decided to incorporate the idea of the National Assembly, composed of 3 estates who would discuss and debate as a new government, yet single body. Immediately, opposition within the court grew, and those in Marie Antoinette's close circle were offended and outraged. In June of 1789, Countess d'Ahmer wrote a pamphlet herself titled The King of the Third Estate, in which she expresses her discontent towards the National Assembly and expresses support for Marie Antoinette, calling her a well-informed princess who knew about all the plots that were being hatched against the government. By calling her well-informed, she seems to say that the queen, despite contrary belief, actually did have an idea about politics, and that she was not entirely selfish, lust-driven, etc., but that actually she was aware of the state of France. What is interesting is that the Countess states that the king numbered among the revolutionaries at that time, a strange twist of fate that can only be explained by admitting that the hand of Providence was involved. The king, she says, was part of the revolution, yet he is never outright attacked. Perhaps it may have been to keep the Countess safe and not on the king's bad side, but that didn't stop the other nobles from berating Marie Antoinette with ridicule. The king is never blamed, even though the Countess makes him seem as if he is at fault. Her only explanation is that fate caused it to happen. Yet, in the same circumstances, such as the instance of the diamond affair, the queen was blamed outright, even though she didn't have any involvement. In this document, and in some of the others I have mentioned, and in some that I will, the woman, regardless of her role, is always blamed. No popular pamphlets were published about the king or other court nobles. It is only the queen, the mistresses, and other female figures that are blamed and villainized. These extremely misogynistic views may as well be an impact of their religion, since France at the time was ruled predominantly by Christianity and Catholicism. These views then become consistent with the basis story of Adam and Eve, in which Eve is the reason that man falls. Soon after, on October 5th, in what is known as the October Days, women in Versailles staged a protest against the high prices of bread at City Hall. More than 10,000 women broke into the royal palace and demanded that the royal family return to Paris to ensure enough food for everyone. In this letter by Marquis de Ferreras, a nobleman, much rhetoric is used to show a different view of Marie Antoinette. His letter is narrated as a story would be, and he describes the queen's son, the Dauphin, as he ruffled his sister's hair, kept saying, "Mama, I'm so hungry." The queen, with tears in her eyes, took the Dauphin in her arms and got up hastily. At this time, people called for her to go onto the balcony, and the queen, according to him, says, "I'll do it, even if it costs me my life." First, he is able to use the Dauphin, or the queen's son, to show empathy and use a form of pathos. By showing that the boy was hungry, Marquis seems to say that just like the peasants, the royal family also experienced hunger. He was able to show the familiarity of the circumstances between the two opposing sides, perhaps to alleviate the views of the luxuries the royal family possessed. Then, the fact that he emphasizes the tears of the queen show that she is not selfish as the public had made her out to be, and that she was loving and affectionate of her children. The last quote he writes from her indicates that she is brave and is willing to risk her life for the people of France, again, a view of her that the public did not have. He shows only the good sides of her, and although a nobleman, he really had no reason to defend the queen, because at the time he was a known moderate, not for or against the monarchy. The fact that he wrote kind things about the queen may be his attempts at dissipating the tension, or perhaps that is what he really observed. But he makes clear use of rhetoric to show that Marie Antoinette is innocent and that the public are villains. Regardless, civil unrest couldn't be stopped, and King Louis XVI was warned and told to flee France. But the plan was stopped, and Marie Antoinette's brother, King Leopold, had to organize for help. Immediately after, in a newspaper called The Revolutions of France and Brabant, an article appeared with the headline, "Horrible Maneuvers of the Austrians at the Tuileries Palace to Bring Civil War to France." It insinuated that Marie Antoinette was conspiring with other members of her Austrian family, who, if you'll recall, was a long-standing enemy of France and further fueled the unrest. It begins stating, "A number of French aristocrats are working against our country's glorious revolution." This naturally leads one to believe that there are important negotiations, the aim of which is not to help the new regime but to restore the old one. This committee could be called the Austrian Committee. The first thing to note is that this article also mentioned other countries' involvement in these negotiations, such as Spain. But the entire committee working to restore the monarchy is named the Austrian Committee. This definitely goes back to Marie Antoinette's birthplace and the villain she's proclaimed to be by the public. Making it directly tied back to Marie Antoinette, or at least stipulating that rumor, makes Marie Antoinette a culprit and a worker against the revolution. She was villainized indirectly through her mother country, and that was enough for the readers to solidify the link between Marie Antoinette and evil. In that sense, the literal term of Austria came to symbolize or represent evil, and anything or anyone associated with it were evil as well. In addition, the revolution was glorified, and the entire article put readers in a precarious position. If they weren't for the revolution, then they were traitors and would be dishonored. If they were for it, they had to despise the royal family, and then they could have honor bestowed upon them. Eventually, King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and their children were captured. They were put and locked in separate rooms, and then put on trial. Underground, a plan known as the Carnation Plot was attempted by the royalists to save the queen, but guards spotted the note written to her and delivered through carnations, and the queen was immediately put on trial the next day. During her trial, Marie Antoinette stood calmly against the jury and the judge, even as she was convicted of several charges, including theft, treason, and charged with sexual abuse of her own son. This makes sense with the view that people had of her: lust-driven, in favor of the traditional monarchy and against the new democratic regime, and due to her previous involvement with the Diamond Necklace affair, also a thief. She was convicted of all three charges after a 2-day trial from an all-male jury and was sent to the guillotine as well. The king and the queen were executed. The former Dauphins, or their sons, died of tuberculosis in their prison cells, and their daughter was returned to Austria in a prisoner exchange, where she immediately married her first cousin and died childless at the age of 72 outside of Vienna. As for the depiction of Marie Antoinette that is most true, based on historical documents, that identity can never be determined. She may have been extravagant enough to cause her own demise, a tragic hero in a way, but she may also have been a victim of fate, chosen as a scapegoat for all of France's problems in the era of revolutions and revolutionary thinking. But regardless, Marie Antoinette, through fate or through her own doing, lost everything.